So I think, well, it's not just the procurement part of my business. I think actually really in the construction industry, I think if you ask most people or most organisations, I think there'd be undoubtedly a backlash of, I wouldn't say necessarily concern, but discontent maybe, it might be the right choice of words, with the whole process. So whether it's public sector procurement or even in the private sector, the reality is it's just really, really inconsistent. And it's that inconsistency that not only drives people to distraction, but it's also consumes a lot of time, a lot of resource, and therefore a lot of sort of money, if you like. I think one of, if we talk about our business from a sort of SME perspective, and this is not a sort of in any way a negative, just or we're the smaller type of organisation and therefore, poor old us. But the reality is any investment into a tender or an ITT or your services being procured is an investment of your time, and therefore, you've got to somehow recover that lost time and that investment in time into an opportunity. And therefore, if you're going to do so, you need to be doing it as efficiently as possible, but also knowing you've got a really good chance of securing the opportunity, or your skill set matches really well with the requirements. What we find, and so I'm not going off a tangent here, off track, is what we find and what other people find is the inconsistencies mean is what's being asked for each project by different client or purchasing organisations. They're almost asking for the same thing, but they're asking for it in a completely different way. So what you find is you may have sort of 5 opportunities in any given period. They're all asking something around maybe a quality assurance or quality management process, structure, systems requirements, but they're asking in 5 different ways and actually for slightly different things. So it's not like you can go to maybe like a bank of answers or a bank of previously submitted responses and use that response. You 9 times out of 10, even if the body's there, you've got to spend some time rewriting it, reconsidering it, and it really isn't necessary. If you have a quality management system process in place, whether it's a iOS 9001 or an equivalent, you have one in place. So there can be some really standardized questions around a management structure or a process, or even do you have yes or no? We'll come back to that later. So for me, it's incredibly frustrating because the amount of time and the amount of documentations you've got to pull together just for what's effectively an initial assessment is just so vast, and it's just incredibly frustrating. I think the other thing, and I kind of am going off it a little bit of a rant here, but the other thing with this whole process is years and years ago, a PAS document, so a PAS being publicly available specification, I think it's 91 come out, and it's this amazing document that asks all the questions, whether it's a consultant like we are or a contractor, a set of standardized questions that one would need to procure a construction project. So whether they're procuring the consultant for the early stage or the contractor to construct. And it runs through, and it's relatively detailed, and it runs through all these questions, all the things that you get every single time you get a new inquiry. Okay, so they're all covered, and then at the end, it starts to ask some standardized technical questions. So this is now around how you're going to deliver for the client your services or the product, if you're a contractor, to the client, okay? And then it allows a bit even further down for some tailored questions. It doesn't get used. It's so incredibly frustrating. So you've got this amazing document that could be standardised through construction, through all procurements of all size projects, and it doesn't get used. It's just sat over here. Or I say it doesn't get used. It's a little bit unfair. I'm sure there are projects that use it, but in the mainstream, it doesn't get used. And then you have things like construction lines. So construction line is a procurement organisation, body, whatever, company, if you like. And they're set out, again, to pre-qualify subcontractors, contractors, consultants, suppliers, all through the construction industry. And even that doesn't get used to its full potential. But even forgetting that as a route to procuring services, you'd still find that you're getting a PQQ or a tender opportunity, and you're filling it out, and it says, "Are you construction line?" And you say yes, and then it carries on asking you the same bloody questions. So I've gone off all over the place, but I think you can see that even in this sort of selection stage, even sort of it gets through the door, you're reviewing this information, it's just a minefield. And what one's got to say is, how good is this opportunity, or how well matched are we to this opportunity to even decide whether you want to do it or not? And then you've got to look at the volume of information and the time and the resource you've got to put together to this opportunity to work out how good the opportunity is, to decide even then if you're still going to do it. So in my opinion, it's really, really flawed. There's no degree of standardisation for things that should be standardised. And then the bit that should be tailored or specific, I mean, that brings me on to something else, which I'll come on to. But, even that sort of last section where it's specific, then at least you can focus there on a small amount of, well, not a small amount, but that's where the time should be focused on for making sure that you as a client or the procuring or purchasing organisation authority is making sure they're aligning with the right supplier, because they focused their questions on this little bit here, not this massive standard part here, by doing it differently. And then the supplier can then spend their time really putting their efforts and energy and their expertise and be able to demonstrate their knowledge and experience in this small section here to make sure the organisation is really aligned. What happens is all the time gets spent on this standard stuff. You get absolutely lost in the process. And by the end of it, you're fed up before you even get to this bit. So therein lies for me the problem with construction procurement generally. I'm making some very generalised statements, I understand, but for me, that's my experience, and I haven't seen it too much different than I've just explained it. And then I want to come on to this sort of technical side where we want to really align the customer to the supplier. And then what you see, which is equally as frustrating, is consultants like us, so, project managers, cost consultants, who are putting these documents together. And what do? The same old standard thing. What's your method and approach? Put in the CVs, put in some case studies. There's no real consideration around what is the client's drivers. What is specific about this project? What's the main aim? What's the objective? What about good alignment between collaborative organisations and how well they gel and their values? None of that. It's all around, give us a case study. So what happens? You're a big organisation. You look at a job. Okay, let's say Southampton, for example, where we're from. And what they do, they pull out a project from Ipswich that looks exactly the same. What relevance is that? But it ticks a box. So we've got a case study in Ipswich done by a team in Ipswich who would never come into Southampton to do the job, but they've ticked the box. So to me, the thing's flawed. It needs, in my opinion, it needs a complete reform throughout, and it needs to be really considered. And then it needs to be in some way, and I don't know how. I'll admit I don't know how. It probably have to come from leadership organisations to then drive some kind of consistent, standardised qualification stage, aligning with some really specific, tailored and considered questions to then align the right supplier after that point. So I think to summarise for me is, as I said, I think there needs to be a reform across the industry. It needs to come from a leadership level. As I said, I don't really know exactly what the solution is, but in my mind's eye, if I was to know, it would look something like a PAS 91 process procedure document that organisations can maintain throughout the year on a regular basis, looking at sort of periodic updates to it, as well as obviously for each opportunity to make sure it's still relevant and up to date. So that means there's a very low level of resource required to maintain, supplier questions, suitability criteria. And then it's a small amount, as I said, when each opportunity comes up. And then what that allows the team to do is when an opportunity comes in, is just to purely focus on specific questions, relevant specific questions to the project aims and objectives. And then they can make sure, the supplier, that they then look and consider what the customers ask and what they want, and make sure they tailor their answer with a relevant amount, an adequate amount of resource and time, because they now have it to answer the question that's being asked in a really considerate way. So I think that's kind of what I would be looking for as a solution. So I hope you found value in this video and my insights. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. We really look forward to hearing from you.